The bus's engine roared, a guttural promise of escape, as Ethan stood at the edge of Willow Creek's only stop, his hands trembling around the straps of his backpack. At 17, he'd never felt so alone. The weight of his father's words, "No son of mine will be that way," cutting deeper than the autumn chill. Behind him, Caleb, his best friend and secret love, lingered, his eyes pleading for Ethan to stay, even as the town's judgment loomed like a storm cloud. Ethan had always known Willow Creek wasn't built for people like him. Nestled in rural Ohio, the town clung to tradition like a lifeline, its churches and diners buzzing with gossip about right and wrong. When Ethan's father caught him and Caleb kissing behind the old mill, the fallout was swift. A shouting match, a slammed door, and a suitcase thrown onto the porch. "Get out," his father had said, his voice cold as the iron gate that separated their house from the street. Ethan's mother, silent and tearful, hadn't stopped him. Now, with a one-way ticket to Chicago clutched in his hand, Ethan faced a choice: leave everything behind or beg for a forgiveness that would never come. Caleb stepped closer, his sneakers scuffing the gravel. "You don't have to go," he whispered, his voice cracking. At 18, Caleb was taller, his frame lean from years of track, but his confidence crumbled under the weight of their shared secret. "We can figure this out together." Ethan wanted to believe him, wanted to sink into the warmth of Caleb's arms and pretend Willow Creek could change. But the town's eyes were everywhere. Neighbors who'd once waved now turned away, and the pastor's sermons had started mentioning sinners with a pointed stare. Ethan shook his head, his throat tight. "I can't stay, Caleb. Not after this." The bus doors hissed open, and Ethan's heart lurched. He glanced back at Caleb, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell into his eyes. "I'll come back for you," Ethan said, the words more hope than promise. Caleb's hand grazed his, a fleeting touch that burned like a brand. Then Ethan boarded. The doors closed, and Willow Creek shrank in the rearview mirror. He didn't know it then, but he'd carry the ache of that moment for years, a wound that refused to heal. Chicago was a shock of noise and color, a city that didn't care who Ethan loved as long as he paid his rent. He found a cramped apartment above a laundromat, the hum of dryers lulling him to sleep when nightmares of Willow Creek kept him awake. By day, he worked odd jobs: barista, delivery boy, anything to survive while enrolling in community college. His knack for numbers led him to engineering, specifically water systems, a field where he could lose himself in calculations and blueprints. But no degree could erase the memory of Caleb's face or the sting of being cast out. Years passed, and Ethan built a life. At 25, he landed a job with a firm specializing in sustainable water solutions, his expertise in demand as droughts plagued the Midwest. He dated, cautiously at first, then with more courage. But no one ever felt like Caleb. Late at night, he'd scroll through social media, searching for traces of his old life. Caleb's profiles were private, but mutual friends posted about his track meets, his graduation, his quiet existence in Willow Creek. Ethan wondered if Caleb still thought of him, if he'd moved on, or if he, too, felt the pull of what they'd lost. Back in Willow Creek, life trudged on. Caleb stayed, bound by family and fear. He worked at his father's hardware store, his dreams of college fading under the weight of expectation. The town hadn't changed. Same faces, same sermons, but whispers of Ethan lingered, a cautionary tale for kids who dared to be different. Caleb kept his head down, dated girls to appease his parents, but his heart wasn't in it. Every time he passed the old mill, he saw Ethan's smile, felt the ghost of his touch. He wrote letters he never sent, each one a confession of love and regret. By 2030, Willow Creek faced a crisis. The wells that supplied the town's water began to falter. Years of overuse and drought draining them dry. The mayor, a gruff man named Harold, called emergency meetings. But no one had answers. Farms withered. Businesses struggled. And panic set in. Caleb, now 27, overheard talk of a water systems expert in Chicago. Someone who'd revolutionized conservation in drought-stricken towns. The name hit him like a punch. Ethan Harper. Caleb's chest tightened. Could it be his Ethan? The mayor's office tracked Ethan down, offering a contract to assess Willow Creek's water system. Ethan, now 30, hesitated. Returning meant facing his past, his father, the town's judgment, and Caleb. But the challenge intrigued him, and a part of him, buried deep, wanted closure. He accepted, booking a flight to Ohio. As the plane descended, he stared out at the patchwork fields, his heart pounding. He'd left as a scared kid. Now, he was coming back as the man who might save the town that rejected him. Ethan's arrival stirred Willow Creek like a stone in still water. Old classmates stared. Whispers followed him down Main Street. His father, older and grayer, avoided his gaze at the grocery store. Ethan checked into a motel. His engineering tools spread across the desk, and began his work. The wells were worse than he'd feared. Decades of mismanagement had depleted the aquifer. But Ethan saw a solution, a combination of rainwater harvesting and a new filtration system. It would cost, but it could save the town. Caleb heard Ethan was back and felt the world tilt. He wanted to run to him, to apologize, to confess everything. But fear held him back, fear of rejection, of reopening old wounds. Instead, he volunteered for the town's water committee, hoping for a glimpse of Ethan. Their first meeting was electric. Ethan, in a crisp button-down, presented his plan with confidence. His voice steady, but his eyes flickering when they met Caleb's. Caleb, in a flannel shirt, sat in the back, his hands clenched. After the meeting, he lingered, and Ethan did too. Ethan, Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're back. Ethan's jaw tightened, a mix of anger and longing in his eyes. For the wells, he said, not for you. But the lie hung between them, fragile and unspoken. They both knew this was only the beginning. The community center smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Its folding chairs filled with farmers and shopkeepers who eyed Ethan like an outsider. He stood at the front, projector humming, explaining his plan to save Willow Creek's water supply. His slides showed graphs of aquifer levels, blueprints for cisterns, and timelines for implementation. But his focus kept drifting to Caleb, slouched in the back row, his face a map of regret and hope. Ethan forced himself to look away. He wasn't here for Caleb. He was here for the job. After the meeting, the mayor clapped Ethan on the shoulder, oblivious to the tension. You're a godsend. Harper, can you start tomorrow? Ethan nodded, his mind already racing through calculations. The town's aquifer was a ticking time bomb, and his solution, rainwater harvesting paired with a cutting-edge filtration system, required precision. But as the room emptied, Caleb approached, his steps hesitant. Can we talk? He asked, his voice low. Ethan's heart thudded, but he kept his tone cold. About the wells. Caleb flinched, and Ethan hated how much it hurt to see. No, Caleb said. About us. Ethan wanted to walk away, to protect the life he'd built in Chicago. But something in Caleb's eyes, the same vulnerability he'd seen at the bus stop 13 years ago, held him in place. 5 minutes, Ethan said, leading them outside to the parking lot, where the night air was sharp with the scent of dying leaves. Caleb shoved his hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold. I never stop thinking about you, he said. Every day? Ethan, I should have gone with you. I was scared. Ethan's chest tightened. Memories flooding back, stolen kisses by the mill. Whispered promises under the stars. You let me go? Ethan said, his voice raw. You stayed. Caleb. You chose them. Caleb's eyes glistened. I know. And I've regretted it every day since. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Ethan wanted to hate him, to let anger bury the love that still lingered. But standing there, under the same sky that had witnessed their first kiss, he felt the old pull. I'm not here to fix us, Ethan said finally. I'm here to fix the wells. That's it. Caleb nodded, but his gaze lingered. A silent plea. As Ethan walked away, he felt Caleb's eyes on his back, just like that day at the bus stop. The next morning, Ethan began his field work, trudging through muddy fields to inspect the town's wells. The drought had left them nearly dry, the water murky and sparse. He took samples, ran tests, and sketched plans, losing himself in the work. But Willow Creek wouldn't let him forget. At the diner, old Mrs. Carter, who'd once baked him cookies, served his coffee without a word. At the hardware store, Caleb's father glared, his disapproval unchanged. Ethan kept his head down, but the weight of the past pressed harder each day. Caleb, meanwhile, wrestled with his own ghosts. Working at the store, he overheard customers grumbling about that Harper boy and his fancy ideas. Some praised Ethan's expertise, but others whispered about his past, their words laced with venom. Caleb wanted to defend him, to shout that Ethan was more than their small-minded judgments. But he stayed silent, just as he had when Ethan left. At night, he'd drive to the old mill, now overgrown with weeds, and sit where they'd once held each other. He'd pull out his phone, type messages to Ethan, then delete them. I'm sorry. I love you. Come back. Words he couldn't send. Ethan's plan took shape, but resistance grew. The mayor loved the idea, but the town council balked at the cost. We've managed for decades, Councilman Reed argued, his voice booming at a public meeting. Why trust some city boy who ran off? Ethan stood, his hands steady despite his racing pulse. Because I'm the only one who can save your town, he said. The aquifer's dying. Without this, Willow Creek will be a ghost town in 10 years. The room went quiet, and even Reed had no comeback. Caleb, in the audience, felt a surge of pride and pain. Ethan had grown into someone unbreakable, someone he barely knew. After the meeting, Caleb caught Ethan outside. You were amazing in there, he said. Ethan shrugged, his guard still up. Just doing my job. Caleb stepped closer, his voice soft. You're doing more than that. You're giving them a chance, even after everything. Ethan's eyes softened for a moment, then hardened again. Don't make me into a hero, Caleb. I'm here because I was hired. Nothing else. But as he walked away, Caleb saw the crack in his armor, the flicker of something unresolved. By week's end, Ethan had a breakthrough. His tests confirmed the aquifer could be supplemented with rainwater if they acted fast. He presented his findings to the council, detailing costs and timelines. The vote was close, but they approved his plan. As he left the meeting, exhausted but relieved, he found Caleb waiting by his truck. You're really doing this, Caleb said, a small smile breaking through. Saving us. Ethan looked at him, the years falling away. I don't know if I'm saving anyone, he said, but I'm trying. For the first time, Caleb saw a glimmer of the boy he'd loved, and it gave him hope. Ethan's days became a blur of work measuring water levels, coordinating with suppliers, and battling the town's skepticism. Willow Creek's residents weren't all convinced, and every step forward felt like wading through mud. At the motel, he'd collapse onto the creaky bed, his laptop glowing with spreadsheets. But his mind drifted to Caleb. The brief moments they shared, stolen glances at meetings, tense conversations in parking lots stirred feelings he'd buried long ago. He told himself it was nostalgia, nothing more. But his heart disagreed. Caleb, meanwhile, was unraveling. Seeing Ethan again had cracked open a part of him he'd locked away. He started slipping at work, misplacing orders, snapping at customers. His father noticed, his disapproval sharp. "Get your head straight, boy," he'd say, unaware of the irony. Caleb wanted to tell him everything, to admit he'd never stopped loving Ethan, that he'd stayed in Willow Creek out of duty, not desire. But the words caught in his throat, just like they had 13 years ago. One evening, Ethan visited the old mill to clear his head. The place was a ruin now, the water wheel still, the air thick with memories. He sat on a rotting beam, remembering the summer he and Caleb had carved their initials into it. E. H. plus C. M. The letters were still there, faded but defiant. He traced them with his finger, his chest aching. That's when he heard footsteps. Caleb stood in the clearing, his face pale in the moonlight. "I knew you'd come here," Caleb said. "It's the only place that still feels like us." Ethan stood, his hands balling into fists. "There is no us, Caleb. Not anymore." But his voice wavered, betraying him. Caleb stepped closer, his eyes searching. "I never stopped loving you," he said. "I stayed because I thought I could fix things, make my family see. But I was wrong. I lost you, and I've hated myself for it ever since." Ethan's throat burned. He wanted to scream, to push Caleb away. But instead, he stood frozen as Caleb reached for his hand. The touch was electric, a spark that hadn't dimmed in 13 years. They talked until dawn, words spilling out like water from a broken dam. Caleb confessed his years of silence, the girls he'd dated to keep up appearances, the letters he'd never sent. Ethan shared his life in Chicago, the loneliness, the freedom, the relationships that never quite fit. "I thought I could forget you," Ethan admitted. "But every time I tried, it was like betraying myself." As the sun rose, they sat side by side, not quite touching but closer than they'd been in years. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Back at work, Ethan threw himself into the project with renewed focus. The council's approval meant construction could begin, but the timeline was tight. He coordinated with a crew from Cleveland, overseeing the installation of cisterns and pipes. The town watched, some with hope, others with resentment. At a public forum, Councilman Reed cornered Ethan, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're better than us, coming back with your city degree." Ethan held his gaze. "I'm not better. I'm just the one who can fix this." Caleb, in the crowd, felt a surge of admiration. Ethan wasn't just fighting for the well, she was fighting for his place in a town that had rejected him. Caleb started showing up at Ethan's work sites, offering coffee or a spare hand. Ethan resisted at first, but Caleb's persistence wore him down. They fell into a rhythm, working together in silence, their shared history filling the gaps. One afternoon, as they tested a new pump, Caleb laughed at a sound Ethan hadn't heard in years. "What?" Ethan asked, caught off guard. "Nothing," Caleb said, grinning. "Just, you still make that face when you're focused." Ethan's lips twitched, almost a smile. For a moment, they were teenagers again, stealing moments by the mill. But the past wasn't done with them. Ethan's father, now a deacon at the church, attended a town meeting where Ethan presented an update. Their eyes met across the room, and Ethan faltered, his voice catching. His father left without a word, and Ethan felt the old wound reopen. That night, Caleb found him at the motel, staring at a bottle of whiskey he hadn't touched. "He'll never change," Ethan said, his voice hollow. Caleb sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. "Maybe not. But you don't need him to. You're enough. Ethan. You always were." As the weeks passed, the water project gained momentum. The first cisterns were installed, and test results showed promise. Willow Creek buzzed with cautious optimism, but Ethan felt the weight of expectation. He wasn't just saving the town, was proving he belonged. And with Caleb by his side, he began to wonder if he could reclaim more than just his pride. Maybe, just maybe, he could reclaim the love he'd left behind. The hum of machinery filled Willow Creek as Ethan's project took shape. Cisterns dotted the fields, their sleek metal gleaming under the Ohio sun. Ethan worked tirelessly, calibrating systems and training locals to maintain them. But the town's gratitude was uneven. Some farmers thanked him. Others muttered about outsiders meddling. Ethan ignored the noise. Focusing on the data, water levels were stabilizing. For the first time, he felt like he was winning. Caleb became a constant presence, his quiet support a lifeline. They'd share lunches in the shade, talking about everything but the past: music, movies, the future. Ethan noticed how Caleb's laugh had deepened, how his hands were calloused from years at the hardware store. He caught himself staring, then looked away, afraid of what it meant. Caleb noticed too, his eyes softening with hope. One day, as they unpacked equipment, Caleb brushed Ethan's arm, lingering just long enough to make Ethan's pulse race. "Stop that," Ethan muttered, half smiling. Caleb grinned. "Stop what?" Their fragile truce was tested when Ethan's mother appeared at a work site. She was thinner, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes carrying years of regret. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" Ethan froze, his tools forgotten. He hadn't seen her since the night he left. Her silence then louder than his father's shouts. "What's there to say?" he asked, his tone sharp. She stepped closer, wringing her hands. "I was wrong. I should have stood up for you. I've missed you every day." Ethan's throat tightened, but he couldn't find words. She left a note with her number, and he tucked it away, unsure if he'd ever call. Caleb saw the exchange and waited until they were alone. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Ethan shook his head, staring at the horizon. "She thinks she can fix 13 years with an apology." Caleb touched his shoulder. A steady anchor. "Maybe she can't. But maybe she's trying." Ethan wanted to argue, to say it was too late. But Caleb's warmth made him question everything. For the first time, he wondered if forgiveness was possible not just for his mother, but for himself. The project hit a snag when a major pipe burst, flooding a field and delaying progress. The council blamed Ethan, their trust wavering. At a tense meeting, Councilman Reed seized the chance to attack. "This is what happens when we rely on someone who doesn't belong here," he sneered. Ethan stood, his voice calm but firm. "The burst happened because of decades-old infrastructure you ignored. I'm fixing your mistakes." The room went silent, and even Reed backed down. Caleb, watching from the back, felt a swell of pride. Ethan wasn't just fighting for the well, she was fighting for his dignity. That night, Caleb invited Ethan to the mill, their old sanctuary. They sat on the grass, sharing a thermos of coffee under the stars. "You've changed," Caleb said, his voice soft. "You're stronger now." Ethan looked at him, the moonlight catching Caleb's eyes. "I had to be," he said, "but I'm still me." And you're still you. Caleb reached for his hand. And this time, Ethan didn't pull away. They sat in silence, fingers entwined, the past and present blurring into something new. The next day, Ethan got a call from his firm in Chicago. A bigger project awaited a chance to lead a major initiative in California. It was everything he'd worked for, but it meant leaving Willow Creek again. He told Caleb over dinner at a quiet diner, expecting support. Instead, Caleb's face fell. "You're leaving?" he asked, his voice small. Ethan hesitated. "It's my career. Caleb, I can't stay here." Ethan wrestled with his decision. The wells were flowing again, the town breathing easier. At a community event, the mayor praised Ethan publicly, and even some skeptics clapped. But his father stayed away, and his mother's note burned a hole in his pocket. Caleb, ever present, helped organize the event, his smile masking the fear that Ethan would leave again. That night, as they walked through town, Caleb stopped under a streetlight. "If you go," he said, "take me with you." Ethan's heart stopped. It was the promise he'd made 13 years ago, now turned back on him. The first rains came, a gentle drizzle that kissed the new cisterns and filled Willow Creek with hope. Ethan stood in a field, watching water collect, his calculations proven right. The town's gratitude was palpable. Farmers shook his hand. The mayor offered a plaque. But Ethan felt hollow. The job offer from California loomed, a ticking clock. And Caleb's words, "Take me with you," echoed in his mind. A challenge he wasn't sure he could meet. Caleb threw himself into helping Ethan wrap up the project, hiding his fear behind a smile. He'd spent years regretting his silence. Now, he couldn't stay quiet. At a work site, as they tested the final filtration system, Caleb spoke up. "I meant it. Ethan, I'll go wherever you go. I'm done hiding." Ethan looked at him, his heart torn. "It's not that simple," he said. "Chicago, California, it's a different world. You've never left Willow Creek." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Maybe I haven't, but I'd leave for you." The tension between them grew, a mix of longing and fear. Ethan wanted to believe Caleb could handle a new life, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd built walls in Chicago, a life where he didn't have to explain himself. Bringing Caleb meant risking that safety and risking his heart again. At night, alone in his motel room, Ethan pulled out his mother's note. He dialed her number, then hung up before it rang. Forgiveness felt like a bridge too far. The town's revival brought new challenges. Some residents, emboldened by the water's return, doubled down on their resentment. At a church social, Ethan overheard whispers he's still one of them, and felt the old sting. His father was there, standing by the pastor, his face unreadable. Ethan left early, but Caleb followed, catching him by the river. "Don't let them win," Caleb said, his voice fierce. "You're bigger than this town." Ethan looked at him, the boy he'd loved now a man, and felt a spark of courage. "Maybe I am," he said. "But what about you?" Caleb's answer came not in words, but in action. The next day, he told his father he was quitting the hardware store. "I'm done pretending," he said, his voice steady. His father's face darkened. But Caleb walked away, his heart pounding. He found Ethan at the motel, his bags packed for a trip to check the cisterns. "I'm coming with you," Caleb said. No room for argument. Ethan nodded, and for the first time, they worked as equals, side by side, their shared rhythm a quiet promise. The project's success drew attention. A reporter from Columbus came to interview Ethan, calling him the man who saved Willow Creek. The article mentioned his past, carefully worded but unmistakable. It stirred the town again, and Ethan's father finally reached out. asking to meet. They sat in a quiet park, the air thick with tension. I don't understand you, his father said, his voice low. But I see what you've done here. I'm proud. Ethan blinked. The words foreign. Proud. He echoed. You threw me out. His father looked away, shame in his eyes. I was wrong, he said. Can you forgive me? Ethan didn't answer, but the question lingered, heavy as the rain-soaked earth. That night, Caleb found Ethan by the mill, staring at the water wheel. What did he say? Caleb asked. Ethan told him, his voice raw. Caleb listened, then took his hand. You don't have to forgive him, but don't let him hold you back. Ethan looked at Caleb, the man who'd stayed, who'd fought to change. I'm scared, Ethan admitted, of what we could be, of losing you again. Caleb's smile was soft. Certain. You won't lose me. Not this time. As the project wound down, Ethan faced his choice, California or Willow Creek. The town needed him to stay a few months, to ensure the systems held. But California promised a future he'd dreamed off bigger projects, bigger impact. Caleb promised something else, a life together. Wherever that led. Ethan lay awake, torn between ambition and love, between the man he'd become and the boy who'd left. The cisterns hummed, a quiet victory, but Ethan's heart was a battlefield. California's offer was a golden ticket lead engineer on a statewide water initiative, a chance to shape the future. But every time he pictured leaving, Caleb's face stopped him cold. They'd spent weeks rebuilding something fragile, something real, and Ethan wasn't sure he could break it again. Willow Creek, for all its scars, was starting to feel like home. Caleb sensed Ethan's struggle but didn't push. Instead, he showed up bringing coffee to work sites, helping with maintenance, stealing moments to make Ethan laugh. One afternoon, as they repaired a pump, Caleb tossed a wrench with a grin. You're stuck with me, Harper. Deal with it. Ethan caught the wrench, his smile reluctant but real. You're a pain, he said, but his eyes said something else. Caleb's presence was a reminder of what he'd lose if he left. The town's mood shifted as water flowed freely. Farmers planted again. Businesses reopened. And even skeptics admitted Ethan had delivered. At a town hall, the mayor presented him with a key to the city, a symbolic gesture that felt heavy in Ethan's hand. The crowd clapped. But his father wasn't there. His mother was, though, her eyes wet with pride. After, she approached, tentative. I'd like to have you over, she said. Dinner. Just us. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. Maybe, he said, and it was the most he could offer. Caleb's own battles grew. Quitting the store had cost him his father's respect, and whispers about his closeness with Ethan spread. At church, the pastor's sermons grew pointed, and Caleb felt the weight of eyes on him. He didn't care not anymore. He started being open, mentioning Ethan in conversations, refusing to hide. When a coworker asked if he was like Ethan, Caleb didn't flinch. Yeah, he said, and I'm done pretending I'm not. The admission felt like freedom, but it came at a cost. His father stopped speaking to him, and old friends drifted away. Ethan noticed the change in Caleb, his confidence, his courage. It made him question his own fears. One night, they drove to a lake outside town, the water reflecting a full moon. They sat on the hood of Caleb's truck, sharing a blanket. I'm proud of you, Ethan said, his voice soft. Caleb looked at him, surprised. For what? Ethan smiled. For being you. Finally, Caleb leaned closer, their shoulders touching. I learned it from you, he said. And then, because the moment demanded it, they kissed slow, certain, A promise kept after 13 years. The kiss changed everything. Ethan felt the walls he'd built crumbling, replaced by a certainty he hadn't known since he was 17. But California still called, and the deadline to accept was days away. He confided in his mother over dinner, her kitchen unchanged from his childhood. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I could have everything I've worked for, but I'd lose him." His mother took his hand, her grip firm. "You deserve both, Ethan. Love and your dreams. Don't choose." Her words stayed with him, a beacon in the dark. The next day, a crisis hit. One of the main cisterns failed, a valve malfunction flooding a farm. Ethan worked through the night, Caleb at his side, their hands moving in sync. By dawn, the valve was fixed. But the incident shook Ethan. Willow Creek still needed him, and leaving now felt like abandoning the man Caleb. He called his firm, asking for a delay. They gave him 3 months, but no more. "Figure it out, Harper," his boss said. Ethan hung up, his mind racing. That night, Caleb found him at the mill, staring at their carved initials. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked. Ethan told him about the call, the deadline, the choice. Caleb listened, then took a deep breath. "I meant what I said. I'll go with you. California. Anywhere. But if you need to stay, I'm here too." Ethan looked at him. The boy who'd let him go, now a man who wouldn't. "I don't want to lose you," Ethan said, his voice breaking. Caleb pulled him close. "You won't." The days grew shorter, the air sharper, as Ethan wrestled with his future. The cisterns were stable, the wells replenished, and Willow Creek was alive again. But Ethan's heart was split, California's promise of impact versus Caleb's promise of love. Every moment with Caleb felt like a gift, but every call from his firm reminded him of the career he'd built. He'd come back to save a town, but now he was fighting to save himself. Caleb, for his part, was all in. He'd faced his father's silence, the town's whispers, and emerged stronger. He started researching California, asking Ethan about city life, his eyes bright with possibility. "I could do it," he said one evening, as they walked through town. "I could learn. For you." Ethan wanted to believe him, but fear lingered. What if Caleb hated the city? What if they fell apart? "It's not just about you fitting in," Ethan said. "It's about us surviving." The town's gratitude grew, but so did its divisions. At a community picnic, Ethan and Caleb arrived together, their closeness undeniable. Some smiled, others turned away. The pastor approached, his voice low. "You're doing good work, Ethan. But some things don't belong here." Ethan's jaw tightened, but Caleb spoke first. "We belong wherever we choose," he said, his hand finding Ethan's. The pastor walked away, and Ethan felt a surge of pride. Caleb wasn't hiding anymore. Ethan's mother became a quiet ally, inviting them for dinner, listening without judgment. One night, she pulled Ethan aside. "I see how you look at him," she said. "Don't let fear take that away." Ethan nodded, but his father's absence loomed. He hadn't spoken to him since their park meeting, and the silence felt like a verdict. Still, his mother's support gave him strength, a reminder that some bridges could be rebuilt. The project's final phase was a triumph. Ethan trained a local team to maintain the systems, ensuring Willow Creek's future. At the dedication ceremony, the mayor thanked him publicly, and the crowd cheered. Even Councilman Reed clapped, grudgingly. Ethan's father was there, standing at the back, his face unreadable. After he approached, "You did good," he said, his voice gruff. "I don't understand you, but I'm trying." Ethan nodded, his chest tight. It wasn't love, but it was something. That night, Ethan and Caleb drove to the lake, the place where they'd kissed. They sat under the stars, the future pressing in. "I've been thinking," Ethan said. "I could stay a little longer. Train the team. Make sure it sticks. Then we could go to California. Together." Caleb's eyes lit up, but he hesitated. "You sure? It's your dream." Ethan took his hand, his voice steady. "You're my dream too." The next day, Ethan called his firm, negotiating a hybrid role, 3 months in Willow Creek, then a move to California with Caleb. They agreed, impressed by his commitment. Ethan felt a weight lift, the path ahead clearer. He told Caleb, who grinned and pulled him into a hug. "We're doing this," Caleb said, his voice thick. Ethan nodded, his heart full. "Yeah, we are." As winter approached, Ethan and Caleb began planning their move. Caleb enrolled in online courses, eager to learn. Ethan worked with the town, ensuring the systems would hold. They spent evenings at the mill, dreaming aloud about a house, a life, a future where they didn't have to hide. Willow Creek was changing, slowly, and they were part of it. But the real change was in them, the courage to love, to forgive, to start again. Spring arrived, and Willow Creek bloomed. Its fields green, its wells full. Ethan's systems had worked, transforming the town from a parched relic to a thriving community. He walked through the streets, no longer an outsider, but a quiet hero. Farmers waved, kids ran past, and even the skeptics nodded in respect. But Ethan's heart was elsewhere in Caleb, on California, on the life they were building. Caleb had changed too. He'd started speaking openly about his life, his love for Ethan, refusing to bow to whispers. His father hadn't come around, but his mother had, inviting them for coffee, asking about their plans. "I'm proud of you," she told Caleb, her voice soft. "Both of you." Caleb held Ethan's hand under the table, his smile brighter than ever. For the first time, he felt free. Ethan's relationship with his parents was slower to heal. His mother called weekly, her apologies turning into stories of her own regrets. His father sent a letter, short but sincere. "I'm learning. I hope you'll give me time." Ethan kept it in his wallet, a reminder that change was possible, even if it came in pieces. He didn't need their approval anymore, but he wanted their love. The day before their move, Ethan and Caleb returned to the mill. The water wheel turned again, repaired as part of the town's revival. They sat on their old beam, tracing their initials. "We made it," Caleb said, his voice thick. Ethan nodded, leaning into him. "We did." They talked about California's small apartment, new jobs, a life where they could walk hand in hand. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs. The morning of their departure, Willow Creek gathered to say goodbye. The mayor gave a speech. Farmers brought gifts, and Ethan's mother hugged them both, tears in her eyes. His father stood at the edge of the crowd, offering a nod. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Ethan and Caleb boarded a bus, not unlike the one Ethan had taken 13 years ago. But this time, Caleb was beside him, their hands clasped, their future bright. In California, they built a life. Ethan led his project, his expertise shaping the state's water systems. Caleb found work as a mechanic, his hands steady, his heart full. They rented a small house by the ocean, where they'd watch sunsets, their love a quiet rebellion against the past. Willow Creek faded into memory, but its lessons stayed. Love could endure, forgiveness could heal, and home was wherever they were together. Years later, they returned to Willow Creek for a visit. The town had changed, new faces, new ideas, a pride flag at the community center. Ethan's system still ran, a legacy of his courage. At the mill, they found their initials, now joined by others' kids carving their own stories. Caleb smiled, pulling Ethan close. "We started something," he said. Ethan kissed him, the water wheel turning behind them. "Yeah," he said. "We did." Their story wasn't just about saving a town. It was about saving themselves, finding the strength to love, to forgive, to build a life unapologetically their own. Ethan had left as a boy, kicked out for being gay. He returned as a man, holding the key not just to the wells, but to a future where love won.